So could you introduce yourself and speak a bit about what you do?
Zilla Jones, Defense Counsel. I represent people that require a lawyer. So sometimes on legal aid, sometimes privately. And I take all kinds of cases, and I'll also deal with their matters that arise from that. Sometimes a person will have issues with child protection or with social assistance or with their housing, and I'll also help them with that, as well as their criminal matters.
So I've been having conversations with you over the past few days around the Ghomeshi case, and in particular there's been a lot of discourse around, one, the behavior of defense lawyers in court and people's criticism of that, and two, also a lot of questions around the justice system isn't working for sexual assault survivors and what alternate systems we can come up with, and this idea of sexual assault courts. And you've been speaking quite eloquently as a woman who does public defense. And I think that's an interesting perspective, your kind of understanding of this case and the understanding of the role of defense and the duties of a defense counsel.
Well, that's a big topic, and it's a controversial topic. And obviously, as defense, I have a certain perspective, and I make no apologies for having that. But first of all, I don't necessarily agree that we can hive off the issue of sexual assault cases from other cases. I don't know if it's possible to do that, to say we'll deal with those cases in one particular way and deal with everything else the same way. And I find that to be problematic for a number of reasons. And of course, one being the fundamental purpose of what the justice system is, and the second being the consequences of what happens when you run afoul of the justice system. So in terms of the justice system, obviously we in Canada and in other countries have developed the concepts of the presumption of innocence and the need for the Crown to prove its case beyond a reasonable doubt before an individual is given the stigma of a criminal conviction. And there's very good reasons for why we have made it that kind of a system. And even in the case of sexual assault, there's always a question we have to be alive to of wrongful convictions, of people being convicted who did not commit an offense. And the best protections that we have for that, and they're not perfect because we still do have wrongful convictions, but absolutely essential is that people do not have to prove their innocence. The state has to prove their guilt. So we start with the presumption that the person has not committed the offense, and the state must prove that. And even with sexual assault, we have to do some point about the consequences. So the other point to keep in mind is that when somebody is convicted, what this criminal justice system does is in most cases it puts a prison or jail sentence on the table. Sometimes for more minor offenses, perhaps not, but certainly for sexual assault, if there's penetration, the starting point is a 4-year penitentiary term. So that's a significant sentence. And I don't know that we think critically enough about that, because what we are saying is if you do something wrong, you get locked up in jail. And as women of color, when we talk about the justice system being patriarchal or colonial or racist or all of these things, part of that is the consequences of running afoul of the justice system. And are we willing to say that we want to see more people doing penitentiary time? Do we think that that addresses the problem of sexual assault? Does the fact that sexual assault is happening somehow get improved or made better by more people going to jail? And perhaps what we need to be looking at is bigger questions as to what is the purpose of the justice system? How do we deter crime? Because we know that locking people up does not deter them. It doesn't deter them personally. I have clients back over and over and over again. Once they get caught in that system, it's really hard to get out of the system because you're stigmatized by the record, you can't get a job, it's a vicious cycle. And we don't see it deterring other people from committing crimes, because people still do. And we don't really see it rehabilitating many people. So what is the purpose of this very expensive incarceration system that we have of them to make people feel good? And why are we as feminists, as women of color, falling into this trap of thinking that if somebody rapes somebody else, justice is done because they then serve time in jail? Have we taught them that their behavior was wrong? Have we changed their behavior?
So do you defend sexual assault cases?
I do defend sexual assault cases.
So there's been a lot of conversation around Marie Henein, whether she's a kind of traitor to women. How do you, as a female defense attorney, what is it like defending sexual assault? Why do you do it?
Well, first of all, not all sexual assault is men assaulting women. I will agree that that obviously tends to be the majority, but there are men accused of assaulting men, and there are women accused of assaulting women, and there are women accused of assaulting men. And I've had transgender cases and all kinds of different cases. So it certainly isn't a simple issue of a male-female one. But I do accept what people are saying is that the majority are, and that, I would say, is a fair assessment. And in those cases specifically, because I assume those are the ones that the question refers to, how do I feel about doing it? Well, every case is individual, first of all. And I think that's a very important point, is that the justice system is dealing with individuals and people looking for systemic responses. And obviously, there are some things on the justice system that are systemic, such as, who are the judges and what are the consequences and how do we apply the law and policing, all those issues. But in terms of the individual that is before the court on any given day, they are dealt with an individual. Their sentence is individual to them, and their trial is individual to them, and we as defense have to be focused on that. So I know there's a lot of criticism as to why don't defense question certain things, and of course we do, and defense counsel certainly, they're trying to make changes in the larger systemic issues. We do that. But when we are dealing with this particular client in our office, it has to be about them because that's our job, and we are actually ethically bound to defend that person's zealousy. If we can't do it, we don't keep the case. So if I do have a sexual assault case that would make me uncomfortable or I just don't like how it's looking, it's my obligation to give that client to somebody else and not keep them. If I choose to keep them, it means I'm comfortable defending them. And certainly people don't see a lot of the work we do with the clients behind the scenes. Most cases do not go to trial. So we don't often have to defend a sexual assault trial because most cases in general settle, they plead out. And so a lot of what we do is discuss with the client. We show them the particulars of what happened. We get their side. And sometimes they will admit to me they did it, and they feel bad about it. And if that's the case, then obviously we're looking at doing a guilty plea. And then my job is to negotiate with the Crown as to what that sentence would look like to try and keep it in the lower end. Sometimes there are facts at issue. So often these things aren't cut and dry. They may say, well, yeah, I admit that I had sex with her, I should have had sex with her, but I never forced oral sex on her. Or it was only oral sex, it wasn't vaginal sex, or whatever the case may be. So it may be that those facts are the issue, and some facts would warrant more time than other facts. So there's a lot of negotiation, there's a lot of wheeling and dealing that happens to get a result that is fair on both sides. But if we do go to trial, then it would only be because my client is not accepting responsibility. My client is telling me they didn't do it, or they thought there was consent, or it was somebody else, or whatever the issue is, or she has a motive to lie. And I have no way to know if that's true. And I think the important thing to remember with sexual assault is that it is unique compared to other cases. I think that's why we have so many challenges with it. And I was thinking about that. What can we do to change or make things better? It's very difficult. But when you have a sexual assault, you have something that people pleasurably engage in freely and voluntarily every single day. The DNA isn't going to tell you much because if these are people that are known to each other, have had a relationship in the past, then his sperm being in her isn't automatically suspect. There may not be witnesses because this probably happened in the privacy of their home or their car or wherever. So you've got this case where really all there is two people's word. And that's unique. There aren't a lot of cases like that other than sexual assault. And so if my client is adamantly denying that he forced sex on her, I have no way to know if that's true or not. And sometimes he's in denial, and sometimes he's lying, and sometimes he's not. So I, as his lawyer, have to advance his position that he didn't do it unless I see something telling me I can't do that. And if he tells me she's mad because I broke up with her or whatever, then I have to go with that. And it's my obligation to follow that as far as I can within the bounds of the law. And so I don't particularly feel conflicted by that because I don't know what happened. It's not my job to know that at this point. It's the judge who will decide that. And so my job is to advance his position. And of course I always talk to my clients about consent. I want to make sure they understand that. And when they understand it, do they still think that that's what was happening or not? And sometimes when I tell them that, they go, oh, I didn't know that wasn't consent. And then I'm going to have real problems putting that person on the stand because I know they're going to fall apart when they testify, if they testify, if I need them to. And we're going to have a conversation about that. But once I have explained that to them, often they conduct themselves differently in the future, I hope. And we do discuss those issues. And certainly if they come in saying things like, well, she's a slut and she sleeps with everyone, I say, do you think that justified what you did? And sometimes that makes them think. They've never thought about that before. So I certainly don't agree with everything they say and agree to bad tactics or anything like that. But certainly with any case where the only evidence is the other side's witness, you have to shake their credibility because that's what you have to do. I don't think court is ever fun for anybody, and I don't particularly enjoy having to take a witness apart, but I think it's important for the functioning of the justice system that be done.
So obviously for the public, when most people have contact, people that don't come from highly criminalized, highly incarcerated communities, they tend to have contact through these high-profile trials that are involving expensive lawyers, celebrity defendants. That's obviously not the reality of the justice system that most defense lawyers are engaged with every day.
No, absolutely not. I mean, most of our clients are Aboriginal, African Canadian, immigrants, poor people, and most of them plead guilty. So every day in the justice system, what you're seeing is people coming to court and taking some kind of a plea, and their lawyer advocating for them, trying to not get them to get a jail sentence or to get a lower jail sentence or to not get restricted probation conditions or those kind of things. And that's what we do. That's what 90% of us do 90% of the time. And then there are a few lawyers who will have these high-profile cases, and a few of us will have big cases now and again. But most of what is happening is poor people being incarcerated over and over and over again. And we see this mass incarceration of our lowest socioeconomic groups. And that is what concerns me as a defense counsel. And that doesn't seem to be discussed as much as it should be. And when we look at some of the issues on Gomeshi, people have talked about the way testimony is received. And they feel that women's testimony or sexual assault survivors' testimony is not understood properly by a white, middle-class, older male judge. And they feel that the way that women relate to one another perhaps isn't understood. Well, you could say the same thing about most of our accused, that the judges don't understand where they're coming from either. And I've had clients where, because I know the lifestyle they're coming from, I find what they're telling me to be plausible, but the judges find it completely implausible. And if they do dare to testify, it usually doesn't go well for them. I've had people with FASD on the stand, and Crown attorneys deliberately asking them confusing questions to get them to admit to it so they can then say, oh, they admitted to something. But they have no idea what they just admitted to. And when I say, Your Honor, he didn't understand that, he has FASD, oh, sit down, you're impacting the cross-examination. It's a perfectly fine question. Well, maybe it's a fine question for an adult of normal mental ability. My client had a 5-year-old reasoning, the level of reasoning of a 5-year-old. And he was being asked all kinds of questions that he didn't understand. And we see that all the time with the way that our clients are viewed. And in fact, many of our clients are themselves victims of abuse, sometimes sexual abuse. I'm pretty sure that almost every female defendant that I've had has been sexually assaulted. And that has often caused them, because they haven't dealt with it, to act out violently or to act out by drinking or using drugs, and that leads to healing and other problems. And most of them have been assaulted. Many of them were assaulted when they were in CFS and Child and Family Services. So it isn't as cut and dried as, you know, there are people that commit sexual assault and then there are survivors, and there are these two groups that don't mix. There are people who are survivors of sexual assault who also commit offenses. Some of them are male survivors of sexual assault. A lot of them are male survivors of sexual assault. Or their parents were survivors of sexual assault in residential school, and their parents dealt with it by drinking, so the home was dysfunctional.
So I have a couple of other questions to ask you, and one is, would you say that it's possible to be a feminist and also to defend people accused of sexual assault?
Absolutely. I would consider myself a feminist. I do think there are some problems with feminism, and it sometimes gives me pause, but I would say, yes, I am a feminist because I believe in the equality of all people. I believe in the equality of women. I believe in better organizing the systems of society to better include women's realities, and I do all of those things. So absolutely, I believe in women's own agency and independence and all of those things. So I would define myself as a feminist. And I do think that there's nothing that inherently conflicts with the profession of being a defense counsel or defending sexual assault cases. Because remember, we are defending those individuals in those cases. It says nothing about our systemic beliefs. It doesn't stop us from doing other advocacy on the issue. We defend sexual assault victims all the time. We defend women that stab their abusive husbands or beat them up. We defend all kinds of women that have been unfairly treated by men. It isn't a cut and dried issue of the kind of cases we take. There are more and more women coming into the criminal justice system, and many of them have been abused and sexually assaulted, and we defend those people. We stand for the presumption of innocence for everybody, And many of us are concerned about incarceration for everybody, and women's incarceration is a real concern, because when you incarcerate women, you're often taking away from their children and creating another generation of the criminal justice system. So a lot of us are trying to help women that are incarcerated and allow them to have their children, or allow them to do services in the community, sentences in the community. So all of those things are feminist things to do, I believe. Recently there was a case, I don't know if you saw it, but there was a case where a 13-year-old girl was sexually assaulted, and she breached her curfew because she was upset about it, and the police took her to jail rather than to a sexual assault crisis center somewhere to get help for a sexual assault. And the judge was actually very upset with the Crown Attorney for having done that. And it was defense counsel that was bringing this forward, saying she's a rape victim, why is she in jail? So we are concerned about all the rape victims, and I feel that sometimes it's only the high-profile cases where it's a white, sort of mature, middle-class, attractive woman that is claiming sexual assault. People can relate to her and they're upset, but there are a lot of rape victims who are 12-year-old sex workers that are Aboriginal girls on the street. And are people concerned about them? And defense counsel are. We're the ones that are there for them more than anyone else. So absolutely we can do our job and be a feminist.
And would you agree that the justice system as it is constituted now, would you agree with the criticism that women have that it's not serving sexual assault victims? And if so, what are some of the other solutions that you think might be better, or might be more workable, or might be strategies for helping people seek justice either outside the courtroom or within?
Well, again, it depends what you mean by serving sexual assault victims. Because if serving sexual assault victims means getting people who commit sexual assault sent to jail, that's only a very narrow way of looking at it. And I would say, is it serving any victim to get people sent to jail? And you often see a murder case where someone gets a sentence and the family go, well, it's not going to bring back my loved one. It's not going to undo what was done to you because somebody else gets jail time. And I don't know why we have this idea that we're so invested in somebody getting punished that we don't even know, and how that makes us feel any better or changes anything that happened to us. So to me, first of all, that's not a feminist way of thinking. That's a very colonial way of looking at control and social control and how we deal with things. It's not a restorative way of addressing things. And I would like to see most offenses dealt with in a much more collaborative, restorative, community-based way. I think we've only barely started down that path, and I think that's what we should be working to in the future. And I firmly believe there will come a time when our jail system is looked at as absolutely barbaric. And that is not how most crimes will be dealt with, including sexual assault, including a number of other crimes. Very few people are Paul Bernardo and need to be locked up. So, first of all, I think we really need to question that. If we feel that sexual assault survivors need to be seeing convictions in order to get justice, I absolutely think that sexual assault victims need more support in terms of the counseling. And again, it's usually the middle-class women who can access that. My clients that are indigent and living on the streets when they get sexually assaulted don't go to crisis centers, they don't go to counselors, and they don't get help. And they deal with it by alcohol and drugs and prostituting and other issues. So absolutely we need support for all the women. I do agree that there's a rape culture in general that allows men to feel entitled to sex with women, and I don't think enough women are taught to be assertive either. So I think there's a lot that we can do with the dynamics of how we raise children, how we raise boys in particular, how we present imagery of women in general, and sexual ethics and all those issues. There's room for lots of conversation on that. But in terms of the court part of it, as I said, it is going to be a difficult crime to prosecute just because of the lack of evidence in most cases. It is more challenging. I don't have any bright ideas about how we can deal with that. I know people have talked about the trauma piece, and I think that it's perfectly acceptable to have psychologists examining sexual assault survivors and saying that they believe this person has PTSD and that may impact their memory, things like that. But I don't think it's going to be possible for an expert to come into court and say 100% certainty, I can say that this particular person didn't tell the truth on this issue or appears not to be telling the truth on this issue because of her trauma. I just don't think we can make that connection. And until the science or the methodology gets better, maybe we'll get to a point where we'll be able to determine that. But all we can say is possibly there's trauma and possibly there are issues. But again, we're looking at reasonable doubt as a standard. And so I really think that we need to separate believing survivors from what can be proved in a courtroom. Because absolutely, if someone in your community tells you they're a sexual assault victim, you should believe that person and help and support that person. I'm a defense counsel. I've supported people through sexual assault. I would still do that. Obviously, if my daughter or sister or someone I love comes to me and says she had a sexual assault, I'm not going to cross-examine them and prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. I'm going to say, okay, let's get you some help? Do you want to go to the police? Do you want to go to the hospital? What do you want to do? And obviously, supporting women, not judging them, not blaming them for what happened is important. But when we get to the court, I think what people need to understand is that we are in a different environment because now it is assumed it didn't happen. That's the nature of court. It has to be that way. We assume it didn't happen, and it has to be proven, and it has to be proven beyond a reasonable doubt with evidence. And unfortunately, in some sexual assaults, that isn't going to happen. And in some other cases, that isn't going to happen. It's not only sexual assault. But as I said, it does seem to be more of a problem in sexual assault because of the lack of other evidence that some cases will have. But at the end of the day, we can't tie our sense of well-being to whether somebody else gets convicted. It has to be tied to other things that are in our power to do, like the support and the help of people and the sharing of stories and all of those things. I think that this case has done a lot of that. I think it has brought a lot of those conversations into the open. I believe survivors, I have no problem with that. Some defense counsel, that doesn't bother me, as long as it isn't something that changes the presumption of innocence or the way we treat our accused. I think absolutely in society there are people that aren't sensitive to those issues, absolutely. And I think more men are in this conversation now, and more people are aware of what happens. And I think the next time someone close to them says they're sexually assaulted, they may respond in a more uplifting and positive way. But the decision as to whether to report has to be that woman. And I think knowing what we know about the process, it may not be something every woman wants to do. And maybe that should be respected if it's really her choice. Obviously, if someone's pressuring her into that, that's a different story. But there are some cases that maybe are sort of, I don't want to say ambiguous, but there may be some cases that just are going to be more difficult to prosecute than others.
We are coming to the end of the time. Is there anything else that you'd like to say or anything you feel that needs to be added?
Well, I just think that in terms of defense counsel and defending sexual assault, again, it's such a small piece of what we do. We are defending the marginalized, we're defending the vulnerable, we are defending people that have been badly treated by the police or the authorities. And these cases are only a small sampling of what most of us do. And it's unfortunate that we really only hear about defense in a negative way when something like this happens, and we really aren't acknowledged for the work we do most of the time, holding up this justice system, getting these pleas through the system so the system doesn't collapse under the weight of having to deal with too many people. We aren't thanked for that. We don't expect to be. But to discourage women from the profession as a whole because they might have to do these sexual assault cases once in a while, I think really does a disservice to the justice system and to accused. Because the better defense counsel you have on the other side, the better that is for everyone. The state has so many resources, and that's the other thing people don't see. In a case like Gameshi, if the state wasn't putting its resources into it, I don't even know what to say about that, because they have police officers, they have investigators, they have Crown attorneys, the Crowns have support staff, they have, and in this particular case, the complainants even had their own counsel, which doesn't always happen, and maybe that's something we could look at more. I have no issue with that. With more complainants having counsel, maybe that's something that the legal aid can look at doing and funding that for people who can't afford it. And maybe the counsel need to take some kind of training so they actually know what they're dealing with. And I'm all for things like that. I have no problem with that. But in terms of the state, they have all these resources, and the accused has only one, their lawyer. And I often feel the weight of that when I'm defending someone. I am all this person has. They don't know the system. Even if it's a sophisticated person like Gian Gomeshi, who knew a lot of things, he probably didn't know anything about the justice system. When would he have dealt with that? And it's terrifying. It is terrifying when somebody is looking at a prison term and looking at the weight of what people will think of them, and this all being in the newspapers, and they come to you, and they trust you. And it is essential we have that relationship of trust with our clients. And that's the other thing when people talk about, well, why do defense lawyers why aren't we more concerned about the complainant? And the answer is because we can't be in that particular case, because we have to put our focus on our client because they have no one else. And so in that particular situation, I will look at the woman, and I may feel bad for her if she seems upset, and I don't say, oh, great, I get to go to court and rip someone apart. But if I don't do it, who will? Somebody has to do that, and I try to do it as fairly as possible. I generally don't humiliate people or harp on things more than I have to. Like, in fact, my strategy is to be nice, so I generally sort of give them an out. Is it possible you're confused? Is it possible this didn't happen this way? I understand it happens to all of us, and give them that opportunity. And sometimes somebody will say they're not sure, they can't say, and sometimes they stick to their guns, and sometimes they make me look stupid, and that's part of the way it works. And we don't know. We go in there and we take a leap, and sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. And people don't hear about the many times people get convicted because the lawyer didn't ask the right questions or the witness got the better of the lawyer. It happens. As defense, we probably see more people convicted than acquitted, even the good lawyers. Way more convictions. And that's the way the system works. And most times the state probably does have the right person. But we need to be sure of that, because if they don't, someone innocent goes to jail for a very long time.